This is Amy, and you're listening to the Talkin' Appalachian podcast. Hello, everybody. I hope that you are staying warm wherever you are. It's a bit airish here in the Appalachian Mountains in central Appalachia. Good Scots-Irish word to describe the weather. And I have just come back from a trip that took me from New England all the way down to the coast of North Carolina. And because places and spaces are so important and they have so many stories to tell, and because I started in the Appalachian Plateau, I wanted to share with you some of the places I visited and some of the things that I learned. So we're starting, as I said, in the northern part of the Appalachian Plateau in the beautiful Hudson Valley. Now, I had a presentation to make in Boston, and it was a presentation to teachers for the Appalachian Writing Project, which is a nonprofit that I direct here at UVA-Wise. And we focus on teaching and best practices of teaching and teaching Appalachian culture. We work with teachers, we work with the community, and we work with students. And we've had this project going for over 20 years. And so I was excited to share with other teachers in Boston about what we're doing. So I made my way over from there through Hartford and to Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow. And on my way through Hartford, I stopped at the beautiful Victorian home that Mark Twain built. Because it was there, and being an English major, I wanted to see it. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a minute. When we left New England, we made our way down to North Carolina and then across to the coastal town of Sunset Beach, where I visited a very special mailbox called Kindred Spirits. So I'm excited to share all of this with you today. But first, I want to say thank you to my Patreon subscribers and your support. It makes all the difference in the world. Also to my Facebook subscribers and your support, to everybody who follows me on social and on YouTube and shares episodes of the podcast. Thank you so much for everything that you do to keep this work going. So first, I want to talk to you about Washington Irving and why I was interested in seeing Washington Irving's little town. In 1839, according to author Jeff Biggers, Irving weighed in on the debate about the uninspired name of our country. The United States of America was not a name that everybody was happy with at that time. And he proposed changing the name of the United States to what he felt was the great American landmark, the United States of Allegheny, or Appalachia. Now, a 3-person committee appointed by the New York Historical Society in 1845 considered his proposal as they debated the country's name. And according to their website, this is what they wrote. The committee members urged adoption of a name taken from our mountains, quote, our mountains, or our lakes, or our rivers, specifically, as Irving had urged, the Alleghenian or Appalachian chain of mountains. What we want, they said, is a sign of our identity. And they found the mountain range, which binds the country together as with a band of iron, as they wrote. It was also associated with, quote, the best parts of our own history, with colonial adventure and revolutionary heroism exactly suited to the purpose. And Washington Irving also pointed out if the country adopted the United States of Allegheny as its new name, its initials would still be USA. Appalachia, the initials would still be USA. And so that would make it easy to change. The acronym wouldn't change. But, of course, enthusiasm for the name change did not catch on, as we all know, unfortunately. So the Allegheny Mountains, along with Catskills and the Berkshires and the Blue Ridge Mountains, they're all part of the larger Appalachian Plateau. And so when I traveled across toward Tarrytown and the Hudson Valley, the landscape is not much different from home. And I found that really interesting. But Tarrytown is where Irving lived and is buried. He was born in Manhattan, which is not far from Tarrytown. In 1783, he was born to a Scottish father and an English mother. And he was named after George Washington because the week of his birth was when New York residents heard that a ceasefire had ended the revolution. And he actually got to meet George Washington when he was 6 years old. Now, his family lived and worked as New York merchants, but an outbreak of yellow fever in the late 1700s led Irving's mother to send him across the state to Tarrytown. Over the years, Irving would live in Europe as an ambassador. He would embark on a writing career that would bring him a lot of acclaim. He came home to New York and bought his home Sunnyside in 1835, where he hosted Charles Dickens, author of A Christmas Carol, among other famous works. He's celebrated as America's first internationally renowned author, and his connection to Sleepy Hollow has forever been stamped on the literary map. You might know him as the writer behind Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle, but there's so much more to his story and this enchanting little town. So grab your lanterns, maybe a sturdy horse. We're headed to Sleepy Hollow. So Sleepy Hollow, with its dense woods and its winding roads, it feels like it was plucked straight out of the pages of a Gothic novel. Irving grew up hearing Dutch legends and ghost stories from the early settlers of the region, and those stories stayed with him, and it inspired the legend of Sleepy Hollow in 1820. He drew heavily on the local folklore and the landscapes. The story, of course, follows Ichabod Crane, a lanky schoolmaster who encounters the infamous Headless Horseman, one of literature's most enduring supernatural figures. But the magic of Sleepy Hollow goes beyond Irving's imagination. It's a real place, and visiting it today feels like you're stepping into the world he described. One of the must-visit spots in Sleepy Hollow is the Old Dutch Church, built in the late 1600s. It's the oldest church in New York and one of the oldest in the United States. It's where Irving set some of the key scenes in his story. The burying ground is where he imagined the Headless Horseman rising up from his unmarked grave to haunt the countryside. So as you walk through the churchyard of the Old Dutch Church, you'll find the graves dating back centuries. It's quiet here. You might hear the rustle of leaves or the chime of the church bell. It's really inspiring. It's also eerie. One of the most interesting stones I found here belonged to a woman named Hulda of Bohemia. The stone reads, died in 1777, herbalist, healer, patriot, felled by the British while protecting the militia, buried here in gratitude for her sacrifice. So, of course, I had to find out more about Hulda, and I turned up an article in Westchester Magazine online, and so this is what the article had to say about her. A Bohemian immigrant lived alone in a cottage in the woods. Her knowledge of medicinal herbs and frequent trade with the native peoples made her the object of much suspicion among the Dutch villagers. Now remember, this is the 1700s, late 1600s was the Salem witch trials, not far from there. And so the witch hysteria was probably still fresh in everyone's minds, even, 70 years later. He was a brave man who passed the cottage of the witch, even in the daytime, wrote historian Edgar Mayhew Bacon in Chronicles of Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow. Located between the forward posts of British and Patriot forces during the Revolutionary War, Westchester County was known as neutral ground. Both sides made use of its vulnerability, depleting its inhabitants of their crops, cattle, and anything else they could get their hands on. As the population dwindled from starvation and sickness, baskets of herbal remedies and provisions started appearing at the doorsteps of those particularly hard hit. Assuming Hulda to be the donor, the villagers turned the gifts away. When she took up her rifle to join her neighbors in fending off marauders, she was once again rebuked. The Dutch preferred going it alone to accepting help from the perceived village witch. One day, British troops crossed through Sleepy Hollow, and Hulda responded to the general alarm. She took out several British soldiers before she was mortally shot. The villagers brought her body back to her hut, where, much to their surprise, they discovered a Bible. Inside, written in rudimentary Dutch, Hulda had willed what little gold she had to the widows of the American Revolution. Maybe to make up for the way they treated her, the community gave her a Christian burial. But because she was a so-called witch, they laid her to rest in an unmarked grave in an isolated area of the old Dutch burying ground. More and more people are getting to know about Hulda, partly because Sleepy Hollow became more well-known after the name change from North Tarrytown to Sleepy Hollow, says Henry Steiner, who's a historian of Sleepy Hollow. Not only is she the subject of a one-woman show that plays throughout the month of October, she's also celebrated with an evening of lantern-lit walking tours and campfire stories as part of Hulda's night at the Rockefeller State Park Preserve. Battle Hill, widely thought to be where Hulda met her end, is also the location of the Headless Horseman Bridge, Ichabod Crane's destination as he fled his headless pursuer. And so the stone that I saw with her name on it was placed there several years ago by citizens of Sleepy Hollow to commemorate Hulda and her story. A short drive from the church takes you to Sunnyside, Washington Irving's home in nearby Tarrytown. Sunnyside is a picture-perfect example of his personality. It's a mix of architectural styles. It blends English and Dutch influences, and it sits on a hill overlooking the Hudson River. And he loved this place. He called it his snug little retreat. He spent his later years here writing, entertaining guests, and reflecting on his career. You could see his writing desk, his personal belongings, and the gardens that he loved so much. But even in this setting, his sense of humor and his fascination with the macabre were never far away. He once joked that he hoped his ghost would haunt Sunnyside after his death. So Sleepy Hollow embraces its spooky reputation. Every October, the town comes alive with festivals and haunted hayrides and reenactments of the story. There's even a headless horseman that gallops through town, a reminder of how his imagination continues to influence the place. But it's not just for ghost stories. It's rich history and its beauty make it a place that you would want to visit year-round. We also had supper one night at one of the more famous taverns in Sleepy Hollow, and it's called Horse Feathers. So I recommend if you go that you visit for a really good meal and good atmosphere. We also went to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, where Washington Irving was buried. Sleepy Hollow Cemetery was absolutely gorgeous. Even in December, the leaves had not completely fallen from the trees. They were just this brilliant reds and yellows. The cemetery is situated on a hill, so you can see the town of Sleepy Hollow below. Washington Irving's grave is in a plot surrounded by an iron gate. His stone is sort of simple. It's a rounded stone with his name on it. It's got 2 little American flags planted beside it. But the gate is what's unique. The gate that has the name Irving on top of it also has a little statue of a headless horseman on the gate, which I thought was really interesting. Sleepy Hollow Cemetery is located right beside the Old Dutch Church. It's not part of the Old Dutch Church burying ground. It was founded later than that. But there are several notable figures buried there alongside Washington Irving. You've got the Rockefellers, their mausoleum. Walter Chrysler is buried there. Elizabeth Arden is buried there. Her name was actually Florence Nightingale Graham, so Elizabeth Arden was her brand name. You've also got Andrew Carnegie. His gravestone is a Celtic cross. Leona Helmsley, several notable figures. So you have these really unique, old, small architectural designs alongside these grand, big, beautiful mausoleums. I could have spent all day in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, honestly. I want to go back so that I have more time. It was raining. It was cold. We spent my husband is long-suffering, and God love him. He walked with me and drove me around and stopped every time I wanted to get out of the car and take pictures or take notes, because graveyard research is part of what I do. I really needed more time to just read the stones because these were some of the more unique stones I think I've ever seen. If you want to see video and photography from this trip, please go over to my YouTube channel, Talkin' Appalachian, and take a look because it's the beauty. The landscape was just absolutely stunning. You have to really see it to understand what I'm talking about. Now, before we turn south to North Carolina, let me tell you about Mark Twain's home in Connecticut, where I learned some really interesting things about this famous American writer. He only had a 5th grade education, which is remarkable to me considering his literary contributions. Harriet Beecher Stowe was his next-door neighbor, and he and his wife kept a death mask of their son Langdon, who died at just 19 months old from diphtheria. They kept that under their bed, which seems weird, but apparently that was pretty common back then. So picture a grand Victorian mansion in Hartford, Connecticut with elaborate woodwork, intricate stained glass, and a cozy, dark atmosphere. This is the home where Samuel Langhorne Clemens, also known as Mark Twain, wrote some of his most iconic works, including The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. The house itself is breathtaking. His wife's family was pretty wealthy, and so that's how they were able to build this enormous home. It was designed by architect Edward Tuckerman Potter in the late 1870s. It has 25 rooms. It has brick walls with Gothic touches and steep gables and ornate woodwork. It's easy to imagine him sitting there puffing on a cigar. He lived here with his wife Olivia and their 3 daughters. They lost 1 daughter and their son in this home. And it feels like stepping into a storybook. One of my favorite stops in the house was the library. And we were led on a tour by a delightful tour guide who was dressed in period clothing and assumed the character of someone who was Twain's friend. And so that was really neat to hear the interpretation of the home from him. But the library was the place where the family would gather after dinner. There's a cozy corner where he would entertain guests with his stories, his humorous stories. And then there's his writing desk on the upper floor where only the men were allowed to go. It's over by the pool table in a corner. And I imagined him sitting there, his pen in his hand, lost in thought as he wrote his stories. Just imagine a desk that you're looking at and you're thinking that changed American literature forever, that shaped American literature forever. When you look at the family bedrooms, the tone of the house becomes more personal. When you hear about the loss and the love and the pressures that came with his fame, it's a reminder that even the greatest writers are human. So when you go to the house, you'll come through the visitor center where there's a life-size statue of Mark Twain made out of Legos, which is fun, and a bronze statue of Twain sitting on a bench, positioned in such a way that it invites you to take a photo. For Thanksgiving, we met family at a quiet stretch of coastline in Sunset Beach, North Carolina, where my family has vacationed almost every summer for 50 years. We love Sunset Beach. It's beautiful. In that time, though, this tiny community has really grown. The swinging bridge that would stop traffic for so long to get over to the island has been replaced by this sweeping concrete bridge that allows a continuous flow of 2-lane traffic to and from. And so more and more homes have been built there. More people than ever crowd the beaches in the summer months. But one thing has stayed the same about Sunset Beach: the kindred spirit mailbox that was put there in the 1970s. Nestled in the dunes of Bird Island, which is about 1.5 miles from the Sunset Beach Pier, this unassuming black mailbox has been a sanctuary for visitors to share their thoughts and dreams and sorrows for more than 45 years. I first visited Kindred Spirits over 20 years ago, and I went back on Thanksgiving Day. To reach the mailbox, you start with a walk, and it's a journey. It's a 2-mile trek along the beach. Eventually, there are no more homes to look at because Bird Island is protected. So all you hear is the ocean, and you feel the warmth of the sun and the breeze, and it just sets the perfect tone. When you finally find it, it's a simple black mailbox perched on a wooden post. There's a bench nearby, and it really feels like you've discovered something that nobody else has discovered, unless there are people there. The first time I went there was nobody around, and I had the place to myself for hours. This time, though, more people have discovered it. So there was actually a line of people, and you kind of wait your turn to go to the mailbox and get out the notebooks. Inside the mailbox, there are journals and pens ready for anybody who wants to leave a message. And over the years, thousands of people have poured their hearts onto these pages. Some write love letters, others share secrets, or they memorialize lost loved ones. And what makes the mailbox so special is its anonymity. There's no judgment, no expectation. It's just a quiet invitation to connect, whether it's with yourself, the universe, or the strangers who've left their words before you. So the origins of the Kindred Spirit mailbox were for many years as mysterious as its purpose. It was placed there in the 1970s by a man named Frank Nesmith, inspired by a romantic notion of connecting people to the spirit of the land and the sea. Frank tended the mailbox for decades, ensuring that it remained a safe space for visitors to share their stories. Even after his passing, the tradition continues. Volunteers maintain the mailbox, replacing full journals with fresh ones. Those collected journals are archived, preserving decades of memories and reflections. When they're full, they go to the archives at UNC Wilmington, and fresh notebooks are put inside. I had the wonderful opportunity to meet one of the mailbox keepers during my visit. She didn't want to reveal her identity because they like to stay in the background. They like to stay secretive. So she said, just call her Annie. Annie rode up on a bike while I sat on a bench flipping through the notebooks with my daughter and my husband. I noticed as she brushed sand around the base of a memorial that's been placed near the mailbox, and then took out some twine to reinforce holiday decor around the post. I followed her back to her bike to ask her some questions, and she graciously gave me some of her time. It turned out, she said, that I had just missed Frank Nesmith's daughter, who had come to the mailbox just minutes earlier. I was here 20 years ago, and I did what everybody does. I came here, and so I'm back. It's been like that long since I came back. I didn't have my daughter, didn't have my son and my husband and all this. And so I know you've heard a million stories, but when did you start maintaining the mailbox?
There's the day I met Mr. Nesmith, which was 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. We met right here, of course. My husband and I bought our house, and then we took a walk to the mailbox and came upon the mailbox, and Mr. Nesmith was here, and he said, "Can you help me?" And he was digging up a bench. He was actually digging up the bench at the mailbox. "Can you help me?" And we said, "Of course, what do you need?" And went about trying to help him dig up a bench that was just buried beyond, we couldn't dig it up. But from that day forward, we were just like fast friends. And there's 3 of us that helped take care of the mailbox since he's passed. And like I say, his daughter was just here. She comes.
So do you have any really special stories?
Oh my goodness gracious, there's like 1,000.
A favorite?
There's 1,000. Him, of course, coming. Mm-hmm. On some of his later days. Yeah. He came one time on his birthday. We had a little birthday celebration, and the fire department brought him in the little, I guess their little pickup truck that they have, and he sat here and told stories on the bench.
Wow!
And
did somebody record it?
It is. It's recorded. And then his CBS interview that he did the one time, which is also on. I don't know if you saw that.
I did.
Yes, that was one of our favorites. Now, as far as the stories at the mailbox, there's several times that all of us have come here, and there's been that moment of meeting when you were supposed to be at the mailbox at the right time, at the right place.
Yeah.
And somebody thinks, my best friend passed away last week, and we're here, and that kind of thing, and it's, well, we help take care of the mailbox.
Yeah.
When you let them know it's like, oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
You know, they're here with you.
And so is that why he started it, to give people a place to pray or to reflect or to...
He and Claudia was also the co-founder, and she as well had this dream. They had a special spot in the sand, mailbox. They had no idea
it was going to turn into this. And I wonder how many mailboxes this one has inspired.
Oh, I bet.
In other places.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
But it's the fun stories, you know, like you will show up, like you say, what were the special ones? There's just so many you can't even think of. Like, you'll come to the mailbox. I would come and bring him the books and when he couldn't any longer come. But when you see a story that's written page after page after page after page, and it's just somebody just spilling their guts, and you hope they're okay the next day.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? I guess those are the special ones. Or you see somebody coming and it's going to be an engagement that night, you know, and they're setting things up.
Yeah.
You know, so it's special stories.
Yeah.
You know, because
you slip in and you slip out.
Well, because he and she, both Claudia, you know, it was a quiet place on the beach. You go and you reflect and you let it. So that's the way we hopefully will keep it.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's a very special place.
So you were 20 years ago?
Over 20 years ago, I came here. Yeah, in my late 20s, single, no kids, just praying for that life and what I wanted. And
you got it?
Then I got it.
Do you think? Well, maybe it was here.
Yeah, maybe it was.
Maybe
it's
it was here.
I remember when I opened the notebooks, someone had written, "I found God's mailbox." And I thought, that sums it up. You know, for me, that summed it up.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
People leave their souls.
They do.
And I hope they find, you know, whatever they're looking for, because that's what happens.
Yeah. What's truly magical is the sense of community that this mailbox creates. Strangers from all walks of life share this space. They leave pieces of themselves behind and find solace in the words of others. Here's an excerpt I came across. Dear kindred spirit, today's my 30th wedding anniversary. My husband passed away last year, but I feel him here with me. Thank you for this place. It feels like home. Here's another. Dear kindred spirit, I hope next year to have a tiny set of footprints beside mine when I visit you again. It's letters like this that remind us of how universal our emotions are, like grief, love, and hope. And this little mailbox holds them all. It's not just about the writing, it's about being present, sitting on the bench, watching the sea and feeling connected to something larger than yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey from Sleepy Hollow to Sunset Beach and the Kindred Spirits mailbox. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and share it with someone who could use a little inspiration. Until next time, I'm Amy, reminding you to keep exploring places that tell stories and to keep talking Appalachian.